Hi, everyone. I'm Brian. I'm a PhD student at Columbia University, and today I'll be talking about revert protection, which is an up-and-coming feature on blockchain and sequencers. This is joint work with Shin from Uniswap, Ciamac from Columbia and Paradigm, Dan from Paradigm, and Brad from Uniswap. So, DeFi applications are applications where users interact with smart contracts through atomic transactions. And these users are charged a transaction fee by the blockchain that's called the gas fee. This gas fee is typically split into base fee and priority fee components. And the important thing is that transactions can have state contingencies. For example, for an AMM transaction, you can set a slippage tolerance, and the smart contract, in this case the AMM, will revert the transaction if the conditions are not met. So these reverted transactions fail, but the user is still charged some gas fee. And if, for example, on AMMs, reverted transactions will usually cost 10 to 20% of the gas fee that's typically used by successful transactions. So given this, revert protection basically is a scheme where block builders and sequencers exclude these failed transactions completely from the final block. So when these reverted transactions are excluded completely, then the user will not need to pay any gas fee for the transactions partially executing. However, the main burden of revert protection is brought on the block builders or sequencers. They need to figure out which transactions are going to fail by simulating the blocks in various orders. And on the right here, we see an example of a reverted transaction on Etherscan. And for this transaction, the particular reason given is insufficient gas for refund. So one challenge of modeling revert protection in the DeFi ecosystem is the variety of settings that revert protection can be applied to. One such setting is bundle auctions that typically take place on layer one blockchains such as the Ethereum mainnet. So in a bundle auction, searchers submit bundles of transactions and place a bid on these bundles to have them included by the block builders. Now, these bids can be expressed typically via the priority fee, the built-in priority fee mechanism, or through a Coinbase transfer. And this difference is important because if you're using the priority fee and your transaction reverts, then you will be charged some part of your base fee and the priority fee that you bid. But if you use the Coinbase transfer, then you will only be charged you'll only be charged the gas fee if your transaction fails. So your bid won't be charged or be considered in the reverted transaction fees that you pay. Now, another broad category of settings is on L2 sequencers that use a priority ordering rule. So L2 sequencers in general typically have a much more algorithmic way of including and ordering transactions. While you have all these options on L1s, L2s are typically, for example, based on time, such as Arbitrum, or based on just strictly by the priority fee order, such as maybe like base or optimism. Uh, and also on L2 sequencers, another up and coming feature is something called MEV taxes. And MEV taxes are designed to capture and split MEV between sequencers and applications. And they do so by imposing a tax on the priority fee, but this is paid only if the transaction succeeds. So we can sort of summarize these main settings with our table here. One group of settings is where you need to pay a partial fee on a failed transaction on both your base and priority fee, such as the L1 block building with priority fees and L2 sequencer with priority ordering. Another broad category is where you only need to pay a partial transaction fee on the base gas fee, not the priority gas fee. And finally, under revert protection, you would not have to pay any transaction fees for failed transactions at all. So given this, our work introduces a novel and unified model that analyzes the economics of revert protection in the above settings, and we are able to solve for closed form equilibria. We show that revert protection offers better auction revenue and more efficient block space usage. And in the specific context of AMMs, we can also um, imply that revert protection improves market efficiency and price discovery. Additionally, we provide potential solutions to address the computational costs of implementing revert protection. So this paper falls into the broader literature on block building auctions in L1 networks, which focus on aspects such as private mempools, proposer builder separation, integrated searcher builders, and so on, as well as in L2 networks. And some of these L2 features include first come, first serve ordering or shared sequencing. So this paper analyzes a new aspect of revert protection, and it analyzes it on both L1 and L2 networks through our unified model. And with regards to the classic economics literature, our auction that we use is a common value all pay auction. And our paper sort of expands in this area by considering differential partial refunds by splitting the refund rate on the base and gas fee, as well as larger strategy spaces for the bidders. So now to dive right into our model, we have end users that bid for a MEV opportunity of common value V. And we emphasize the common value here to distinguish it from other works that maybe use private values. And a common value can represent an opportunity such as arbitrage between centralized and decentralized exchanges, as well as liquidations on lending protocols. So each user can either abstain from the auction, or join and bid a priority fee of BI. So if you win, you pay G, which is the base gas fee plus BI. And if you lose, your transaction is reverted. So you pay R1 times G plus R2 times BI, where R1 and R2 are the sort of rates on reverting transactions on the base and priority fee, respectively. So keeping our running example of AMMs going, in this case, R1 and R2 were between 0.1 and 0.2. So here we have our table from earlier, but recast in the language of our model. So we show that there does not exist a pure strategy Nash equilibrium. So we then go to mixed strategy Nash equilibrium. And specifically, these strategies will be specified by PI, which is the probability that user I abstains, and FI, which is the distribution that user I bids according to. So given these strategies, we can specify the payoff of conditional on a priority bid being realized as a BI, given a strategy of beta of all the other agents as such. So here we have what you pay if you win, and here's what you pay if you lose. So what exactly is the probability that you win? It is given by the chance that either, assuming that everyone plays independently, everyone else either abstains or participates but bids a lower value than you. So combining all of this, we can have an expected utility or expected payoff written here. So for mixed strategy, we know that the user must be indifferent between all choices, which this case includes abstaining and bidding any amount. So here we sort of have a zero payoff condition, where your expected revenue or utility from winning is equal to the expected cost that you pay when you lose. So taking this, we can solve for a closed form symmetric mixed equilibrium based on your abstention probabilities and the CDF of what you bid according to. So now let's analyze the equilibrium strategies. So our first main quantity of concern is the auction revenue. And our first main result is that this total revenue can be split into two components with formulas of everything given as here. One unique thing you might notice about these formulas is that they do not depend on R2. And the main reason is that you can think of it from an economic perspective of there being a marginal bidder that chooses to participate in the auction but bids nothing. So for this bidder, R2 will not matter at all, which is why in the equilibrium, you don't really see R2 coming out. And an immediate corollary of this is that revenue is decreasing in R1. So revert protection, where R1 is 0, is going to be revenue optimal. So to further digest the formula for auction revenue a little, this is mainly derived from the following observation. So the equilibrium payoff of all users is going to be 0 from the mixed strategy. So if no one participates, then the auctioneer makes 0 revenue. But if someone participates, then then the auctioneer is going to make V revenue. So we can essentially rewrite the expected revenue as the expected probability that this arbitrage opportunity is going to be exploited times its value. And the main sort of trade-offs, as you can see here, is that as R1 and R2 decrease, which means you have smaller penalties for reverted transactions, on one hand, you get less revenue from these reverted transactions, but on the other hand, users are now more incentivized to participate. And when they do participate, they will bid more aggressively. So in our equilibrium, this second force of increased user participation and more aggressive bidding is going to outweigh the decreased revenue made from reverts themselves. Now, one other interesting corollary of this result is that if we take n, which is the number of agents participating in the entire auction, and if we take this to infinity, then the revenue is going to be finite. And the specific implications of this result for DeFi is that if this MEV opportunity represents arbitrage opportunity between centralized and decentralized exchanges, then 1 minus p star to the nth power is going to be the probability of that opportunity being exploited. So as R1 decreases, we can say that these ARB opportunities are exploited more frequently, which corresponds to better price discovery and market efficiency, specifically that being that decentralized exchange prices reflect centralized exchange prices more often. Now, the second main area of analysis is on block space and mempool usage. So for block space usage, it's fairly straightforward. Sort of by definition, under revert protection, you will have one transaction that is focused on exploiting the opportunity in the final block, while without revert protection, you can have multiple transactions in the final block. However, when you consider transactions come into the mempool before they're included and confirmed in the block, these are going to be higher under revert protection. And one more potentially harmful result is that this does not converge as n goes to infinity. So from here, we basically see that the two main concerns that the sequencer must take into account when implementing revert protection are first spam from the mempool, and second, the computational cost of simulating all these transactions themselves. So in our baseline model, we've assumed that these costs are negligible, but let's now assume that the cost is C per transaction submitted. We consider two sort of schema for the sequencer to do given these computational costs. First is they just internalize the cost themselves, or second, they pass costs on to users. So under the first scheme, there's no disincentive to user participation, but the other hand is when you're computing the total sequencer's profit, they need to cover these costs themselves. Under the second scheme, we suppose that users pay a flat fee to cover costs. In our paper, we only take the flat fee to be C, although in reality, the sequencer can choose to make their own flat fee rate. So here, there's no cost to the sequencer, but this could disincentivize participation from users. So our two main results when comparing these schemes is that under the first scheme where the sequencer pays themselves, the profit optimal values of R1 and R2 are actually going to be non-zero, which implies that revert protection under the first scheme is not going to be profit optimal out of all the other possible revert rates. However, they still are zero under the second scheme. Our second result is that the profit under scheme 2 is going to be greater than that under scheme 1, even with the profit optimal choices of R1 and R2 if C is small enough. So even with the disincentives to user participation that this fee incurs, the overall profit is going to be greater than paying for the cost themselves in most cases. So some design implications of this are that these revert rates must be adjusted under the first scheme to achieve the most optimal profits. And under the second scheme, you can preserve a flat fee, which is different from the previous setting without revert protection, where your penalties are proportional to what you bid. So finally, I'd just like to mention some brief future directions, and these future directions are going to be concerned with how sequencers balance benefits of revert protection with risks from spam or spikes in demand. Aside from modeling a flat fee, such as C per transaction, we can assume there to be convex costs. And some schemes, besides charging for a flat fee that we can also consider include rate limiting or dynamic pricing. So this concludes my talk, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions over the email. Thank you.